Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin Kinney, and I'm the Senior National Security Officer here at Kpler, based in Washington, D.C. Kpler is a global leader in commodity market intelligence and ship tracking. At Kpler, we provide intelligence tools for trade to enable market professionals to navigate ever volatile market conditions and ensure real-time visibility into shifting market dynamics across 40 plus commodities. Today, our webinar is titled Deceptive Shipping Practices, Quantifying Risks for Non-Sanctioned Vessels. I'm joined by my colleagues, the Dimitris, both located in Greece. Before we kick off the webinar, I'd like to take a minute and have them introduce themselves. So at this time, you mind giving a quick background of yourselves?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Dimitris. I'm a senior refined products analyst here at Kpler. I'm based in Athens, Greece. I'm mostly focusing on the dirty products, fuel oil, refinery feedstocks, but also covering part of the clean products. And we're focusing on flows and capturing those very demanding cases, especially around deceptive shipping practices. Over to you, Dimitris.
Yeah, thanks, Dimitri. So, hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you today. My name is Dimitris Ambatzidis. You can call me just Dimitris. And I'm the senior risk and compliance analyst at Kpler. And most of my time, you will be finding me to try to understand what the vessels are doing during a spoofing, during a dark stage transfer, and during a dark port call. So at the end of the day, we're trying to build a narrative about not only what happened, but also why it's happening. So before we jump into the slides, I would really like to have Kevin first. So Kevin,
Sure.
based on your experience with enforcement, why do you think that deceptive shipping activity such as it is such an important focus, not only for sanctions, but also to either in a wider context? What other risks or threats does this kind of behavior can lead us?
Absolutely. Thanks. I appreciate the question. So, like I said before, my name is Kevin Kinney. I'm a senior national security liaison here at Kpler. But prior to coming to Kpler, I was a special agent for Homeland Security investigations here in the United States. Um, and so, as I look at what we're doing here with deceptive shipping practices, it makes me think to look past just sanction violators, but all transnational organized crime and how these organizations could utilize deceptive shipping practices to then go on to help launder money. They could by movement of these of the sanctioned cargo, and that money then can support different geopolitical activities around the world. Also, drug smuggling. We
Hmm.
have a lot of similar patterns with deceptive shipping practices that we
Yeah.
see when we're looking at the large cargo that's in the media and we follow as a commodity, but also looking at the actual movements that we're seeing for these vessels. It's very a lot of similarities to drug smuggling, human trafficking, also the movement of weapons that would be identified under counterproliferation investigations, things like this. So these are all things that I take in consideration, and as as an analyst and working with our team, these are all things that we can look at, and we look at patterns. We also look even get away from just the movements of the vessel. We look at the beneficial owners. We look at the flag hopping. We look at port calls. And all of these things will help us identify the patterns of someone who's involved with deceptive shipping practices. So thank you, Demetrius. I appreciate the question.
That's nice. And it makes total sense at the end of the day that all these vessels that are engaging with these sanctioned cargoes, at the end of the day, probably they're keen to do more stuff. They have
Absolutely.
already joined the dark side of the world, so why not to do more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we're going to dive into it throughout the webinar, but we're going to see how patterns can change, how
Mm.
based on enforcement actions. Also, we've got a buildup of the U.S. military in the Caribbean, and it's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see what plays out with activities like that. And I know that we're going to be on top of that. We're all going to be watching to see what happens with that force buildup, but also around the world, we're going to see changing patterns like we've identified in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the case with shipping. whatever
Absolutely.
taken place around Venezuela right now, it has a direct effect to the Europe and to the China as well. So everything is being connected all together.
Correct. And one thing I didn't touch on, Dimitri, was possible tariff evasion.
Yeah.
We
Mm,
know that the U.S. has placed tariff on numerous countries on a lot of the commodities that we track. So this
mm,
is going to be something that deceptive shipping practices, we're going to have to monitor. We're going to have to look
mm,
at changing, the countries of origin. We're going to have to monitor this stuff
yeah.
so that regulatory bodies and enforcement agencies can then be aware of this, and we'll be able to give them the background to take action or to actually help folks. And this is the other side of it is, part of Kpler. We can help folks on the insurance side,
Mm,
or folks that are actually trying to protect their interests, that are trying to do the right things, that are
yep.
trying to make sure that they're not involved with, a sanctioned party. So all of these things really come into play when it comes to identifying deceptive shipping practices.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to be that person who says that I told you so, but around this time last year, I do remember that we were having the same discussion and that we talked about what we expected for sanctions in 2025. And we said that back then that our expectation is that 2025 would be the year of enforcement. And honestly, that's exactly what we are seeing right now. And I think that our analysis, let me go onto the slides in order to move the whole discussion forward.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So I do feel that our whole analysis shows a clear increase in activity from both sides of the Atlantic. In January, for example, we have had the US side announced a huge package sanctioning more than, if I'm not mistaken, 180 vessels, something like that. And throughout the year, we have seen similar actions from the EU and the UK at the same time. And as you can see clearly from the graph on the slide, sanctions on vessels are now more than 4 times higher, and sanctions on companies have jumped almost 7 times compared to 5 years ago. The level of complexity that compliance officers face today is nothing similar to what we have seen a few years ago. But at the same time, especially in the shipping world, we now have a much better understanding of what is the driving these sanctions. And the main driver is deceptive shipping practices. So, what about the famous shadow fleets? So, let's start with the good news. We are actually seeing a drop in the total number of shadow vessels because of the new sanctions. We have seen more than 600 vessels being sanctioned within the year, and all of them were being characterized as shadow. At the same time, though, every month we still see around 30 new vessels joining the shadow fleet. So, even with all the strong enforcement we have already had, it's clear that these producers are still able to find ships willing to move sanctioned cargo around the world. And just to clarify that when we mean what we mean at Kpler and Marine Traffic, when we talk about shadow vessels, we are referring to ships that have loaded sanctioned or high risk cargo, and at the same time have also been involved in risky behavior, things like spoofing or dark ship-to-ship operations. And I think that this is a perfect moment to bring in our in-house expert Dimitris Kotsias to explain how we identify actually this kind of suspicious activity.
Thank you, Dimitris. And yes, I think what really makes Kepler stand out is the human factor
Mm,
in this case, is the fact that, AIS is the starting point, but in these deceptive practices, AIS stops being reliable, and that's where you
mm,
need the analyst, you need someone to identify patterns, connect the dots, put the pieces of the puzzle together, and understand what's going on, because just the signaling and the location from AIS can only take you so far. And I think that's what we can do with this webinar and show you these examples and patterns
mm,
that are really useful to know and are telltale signs of the vessels
cool.
being involved in suspicious activity.
So, what do you think are the typical signs of spoofing?
Yeah, we can look at some examples together if you want
Yep.
to move to the next slide
Yeah, of course.
and next after that.
Yeah.
Yes. So first of all, before we show the examples of what the spoofing patterns, it's important to show how normal looks like, right? So normal looks like, in this case, we have Venezuela, and we can look at the vessel coming into the port of Jose. The orange line is the vessel being ballast, heading into the port of Jose. And if you look at the top right, where it's the zoomed in picture, you can see how the trucks go into the berth. They saw the vessel normally executing operation and then leaving. So that's how a normal vessel positioning would look like, and normal signaling would look like. But of course, that's not always the case. And that's when we start to see patterns. We start to see ways that, when we look at the flows and we look at the vessel tracks, we say, hey, something is fishy here, something is suspicious, and we need to take a closer look. So we can start with our first example in the next slide. So as you can clearly see here, again, the orange line, the orange solid line is the vessel tracks along with the green solid line. And you can see that the solid lines go into the Caribbean Sea outside Venezuela, and then the vessel leaves laden from the area. So the common question is, wait a minute, how did the vessel load in the middle of the sea? What happened there? That's when usually the vessels will turn off their AIS signal, or they will start spoofing their location in a specific point or around a certain radius, while in reality they go to Venezuela and they load. So the red dotted line shows the actual course of the vessel. So even though the vessel seems to be in the Caribbean Sea and loitering, the vessel actually went down to the port of Jose, loaded, and then resumed to leave Venezuela and the area. So that's one example of spoofing pattern. If we move on to the next slide, we can see another more intricate example, and that would be the vessel spoofing its location at West Africa. That's something we've seen, I would say, in the last year or so, where the vessel goes to WAF and starts signaling fake positions there. But in reality, again, the red dotted line shows the actual course of this vessel, goes to Venezuela and loads before it resumes to its voyage, typically towards the east. Both fuel oil and crude, the main two exporting products from Venezuela, they both typically head east. So that's another example of when we see the vessel being at WAF but not really doing anything, we immediately say, okay, something's fishy, something's going on. We need to take a more careful look and see what's happening. Then final example, just to show you the extent that the spoofing can occur, is when the vessel will actually signal its position as if it's loading from somewhere else. So in this example, we see the vessel going all the way to Colombia, specifically the port of Tolu, and signaling its position within the port, within the berths, while in reality being in Venezuela to load. So that's kind of one step further, where the vessel doesn't only stop at being somewhere generic in the open sea, but actually is trying to pretend it's doing a valid operation, while in reality it's loading sanctioned cargo from Venezuela. Before we move on to the next slide, which is a separate case of another region in the world, it's quite useful, I think, for the participants to know that very, very recently, this week, we spotted a possibly new spoofing pattern where we see a lot of vessels that load from Venezuela spoofing their location in the Baltic Sea, outside the Baltic Sea, seemingly as if they're leaving Russia. It's very new. We've only just spotted it, so we're still keeping a very close eye on it, and we want to make sure that we've exhausted all of the approaches before we consider it a standard spoofing pattern. But it's something that we saw recently, and I feel like it's relevant to mention it. But of course, it's a kind of ongoing situation, so we're keeping a close eye to see how it will evolve. So that's it on Venezuela, really. We can move on to other regions in the world and see different spoofing patterns. One is the other region is Iraq and Iran, a very, very, very popular and deceptive case, with two countries being very close to each other and creating issues when it comes to vessels loading from there, where the vessels in this case might go to the Al Basra oil terminal, and usually they will turn off their AIS signal and then turn it back on with an increased draft change. So the vessel disappeared, appeared again, and has an increased draft change. So if it talks like a duck and walks like a duck, it is a duck. So typically that means it wanted to do some kind of suspicious activity, and that's indeed the case. They go to Iran, you can see the red dotted line. The vessel goes to Mashhad in Iran and loads and seemingly appears to be in Al-Basra oil terminal. And in the next case, which is maybe one of the, let's say, most sophisticated and intricate spoofing, is when the vessel actually pretends to load from Coral Zubair port in Iraq. The vessel will take its AIS transponder to the Kaz port and pretend it's actually in the Iraqi port, while in reality, again, loading from Iran. That's very, very complex and intricate level of spoofing. And that's, again, where the manual input and the human factor comes into play, trying to identify whether the vessel was actually there, what happened, do we have any indications that this is spoofing, etc. So, don't always trust your eyes, because there's more than meets the eye with these cases. And that's why we're here to help you identify these very, very tricky situations. And moving on to the third and final case for Iraq and Iran, again, vessel comes into the middle of the Middle East Gulf, disappears, reappears again. You get the gist. You get a kind of repetitive pattern of when you see the vessel in the middle of the sea doing nothing, that's immediately a kind of red flag that something is going on. And last but not least, in the next slide, the final region that we thought it's best to describe with some examples is the Black Sea in Russia. Again, we have prevalent spoofing activity there and deceptive practices. So in this case, you can see that the vessel enters the Black Sea in the bottom left corner of the screenshot. You can see again the orange solid line goes into the Black Sea, but then it kind of does a U-turn and becomes a green solid line. But what actually is happening is that the vessel went all the way to the Russian ports in the Black Sea, Novorossiysk, etc., Tuapse, loaded, and then left. And with these cases, it's quite tricky to identify the exact port, because it's almost like a black box. The vessel completely disappears, and we have to rely on other sources to identify the port. And final example for the Black Sea in the next slide, that would be when the vessel does signal its position within the Black Sea and near the Russian ports, but suddenly starts to spoof via GNSS spoofing and has this jerky kind of observed positions, whether they're inland or the vessel changes within minutes from one place to the other. And usually that kind of helps us a little bit to identify the port. Like in this case, we can see the GNSS spoofing happening around the Novorossiysk port. But again, nevertheless, remains spoofing, and the aim is to conceal the origin of the cargo.
Okay, so I do understand from these examples that utilizing the ICE data that we are receiving and your expertise, you're able to identify these spoofing, this dark activity, this let's forward with the umbrella of deceptive shipping practices. But do you have, and I do know that you do have something specific to share with us about cases that are actually confirmed?
Yep, of course, and that can take us to our next section in the next slide, which is identifying the real location of the vessel. Because understanding that the spoofing happened is only the first half of the story, but then the second half is actually knowing what happened, where the vessel went. And that's where satellite imagery comes into play. Of course, not every single operation that's happening can be captured by satellite imagery because of weather limitations and many other reasons. But when we have this option, we of course consider it the utmost truth, right? It's like the absolute confirmation of the vessel being in a certain area. So like in this case, we have a very specific example of an LR1 vessel called Purdue Stellar, which pinged its location on 28th of February of this year at near Al-Basra terminal in Iraq. However, when we're looking at the satellite imagery of the vessel is nowhere close to there, and it's actually in Iran at Bandar Mashar, as the satellite imagery can show in the bottom right corner of the screenshot. So you can see, even though the AIS location and signal shows the vessel being near Al Basra, the vessel, according to satellite imagery, was loading sanctioned cargo from Iran. Similar case is the next slide, where we have this pattern in Venezuela. The vessel went off, as we discussed previously, stopped pinging its location, and we were able to identify that vessel. It's a VLCC called La Balena. We were able to identify it near Amway, at the Amway lightering zone. By the way, the Amway lightering zone is a very active zone in Venezuela with a lot of traffic when it comes to dark STSs. So the vessel went to the Amway lightering zone and had an STS with a smaller vessel. It's very, very typical to see this pattern. And loaded from Amway light and then continued heading east. In the next slide, we can see this pattern, which is very prevalent. We have a VLCC, Progress 5, and then 3 STSs at Amway lightering zone happening. These are usually, we have a big vessel, a VLCC, that's being the vessel that will take the cargo outside of Venezuela, and then we have smaller vessels, LR2s, feeding the VLCC gradually, of course, through dark STSs with sanctioned cargo, whether that's crude or fuel oil. So even though the VLCC Progress 5 was supposed to be in West Africa, it was actually being topped up by smaller vessels in Amway light. And I think that goes to show how intricate and sometimes complicated these things can get. Of course, there's some telltale signs when it comes to AIS spoofing, but that's what Kpler is here for, to not only show that, hey, there's spoofing, but also to say, we know what happened, where the vessel went, where it loaded from, of course, when we have this information through satellite imagery. So I think that concludes all the examples.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Dimitri. So I think that by now we all have a much better understanding of how spoofing works, and also why, even through AI helps a lot, human expertise is still absolutely essential. So we will still have our job here, Dimitri. And we have looked at what spoofing is and how we identify dark activity, and we are all understand why this behavior matters. But what is the bigger picture? What trends are we seeing? It's pretty clear, as we can see from the graph, that in 2025 we are seeing more spoofing, more dark exchange transfers, and of course more dark port calls. And to be honest, this makes complete sense. With stronger enforcement, the non-sanctioned vessels that still decide to take the risk of moving sanctioned cargo are trying harder to protect themselves from Western regulators. And that's why we are seeing more than double the number of these activities compared to mid-2024. And moving forwards to the next slide, as I promised at the start, I also wanted to share a bit about our predictive mechanisms. Because yes, it is actually possible to spot which vessels are likely to be sanctioned in the future. The main drivers are ICE spoofing. Then dark port calls and dark exchange transfers, which carry the same level of severity, followed by whether a vessel shows repeated pattern of deceptive behavior. And finally, we look at whether the vessel have been carried sanctioned cargo, plus any signs of possibly spoofing or dark activity that we have seen before with Dimitri. When we combine all these factors, we can narrow down the list. Out of about 3,000 shadow vessels, we can already identify roughly 300 that we consider high risk and likely to be sanctioned in the next 12 months. And actually, after we published this white paper last month, 35 of these vessels we predicted that would be sanctioned within 12 months were already sanctioned within November. Now, this doesn't mean we are magicians or that we have any inside information from OFAC, let's say. It simply shows that by looking closely at past behavior, we can understand the most likely scenarios for the future and be better prepared for what's coming. So, as we are coming to an end of this webinar, I think that 4 are the main takeaways from everything that we discussed today. First one, that since January 2024, we have seen more than 1,000 vessels that have been sanctioned. The second one is that 80% of these vessels have been involved in spoofing that ended up being sanctioned within the first 12 months after their first incident. Third, for dark exchange transfers, the same percentage is around 30%. So when you see a non-sanctioned vessel spoofing on our platforms, you can safely assume that this ship is already on the regulator's radar for potential future sanctions. And fourth, that still we do have more than 270 sanctions on vessels in front of us based on our analysis. And finally, regulators are clearly shifting from identity-based checks to behavior-based patterns, meaning what a vessel does now matters more than who owns it.
So, Demetrius, with that, how are we going to bridge the gap for our customers or to the customers?
Yeah, so I think that as we look ahead to next year, our main goal is to make risk and compliance data even more actionable and timely for our users. First, we are rolling out real-time updates for both sanctions and operational risks. These will help clients react faster and make decisions with more confidence. Secondly, we are expanding our coverage of deceiving shipping practices, including monitoring zombie fleet behavior. This is quite a trend these days. Ship-to-ship operations and port calls that happen during spoofing. This will give much clearer visibility into evasive patterns. Third, we are introducing a maritime threat intelligence layer, adding important context by detecting piracy, smuggling, and other incident-based risks. As we have discussed before, we're not talking only about spoofing or only about sanctions. The concern is the bigger picture. And finally, we are working on better map visualizations to make risk patterns more transparent and easier to explain, especially for compliance teams reviewing these events. All of these updates are designed with one thing in mind: usability, clarity, and of course, staying ahead of fast change, regulatory and operational risks. And I think that this is a great moment to hear what the audience thinks about all of this. So let's open the floor for questions.
Okay. Actually, there's one in the chat, Dimitri, if you want me to read it.
Yep, of course.
All right. I may have missed it, but are you taking image or tasking imagery, or are you using imagery collected by happenstance over these STS transfer events? Also, which imagery provider are you using?
So, we do utilize, actually, as we have seen before with the other Dimitri, we are utilizing satellite imagery whenever this is feasible based on our sources in order to detect what's going on with these vessels. So whenever we do have a nice gap or whenever we do have a nice spoofing, the algorithms is starting running automatically and we do have the generated events. And then the final layer is what Dimitris is doing, is identifying and giving the narrative. So to bring the AI and the human expertise at the same page. So yeah, we digitalize satellite imagery, but we are not only dependent to that. We are trying to triangulate the information that we are receiving from much more sources.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions?
If we do have any other question, this is the right time to share it with them. Okay, if we do see any deceptive shipping practices increasing because sanctions are expanding or because bad actors are getting more sophisticated? Yeah, this is actually a good question. So, yeah, as we have seen before, within 2025, we have seen a huge increase of the sanctions, and at the same time, we have seen an increase of the deceptive shipping practices. This is not luck, and there is a rationality behind this. As we do have vessels moving around sanctioned cargo, and when we do have non-sanctioned vessels engaging with that commodities, it makes totally sense for them to try to hide what they are doing. The easiest thing to do for these vessels is just to switching off the race and having a port call or receipt-to-ship transfer during everyone is blind. The most sophisticated version of spoofing, as we have seen back on our graphs, and this, by the way, will be shared with all of you after the webinar. It is obvious that the spoofing is quite in a plateau in the last few months. Of course, when we're talking about spoofing, this is the most sophisticated way of hiding what you're doing, and it makes sense that we are seeing the same vessels doing that stuff again and again. But yeah, Dimitri, I can see that you do have something to add here.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on the second aspect of this question about bad actors getting more sophisticated. I could testify to that because it's been like 2.5 years now that I'm with Kpler and I'm tracking these vessels and I'm tracking these kind of deceptive practices. And definitely we've seen cases where it's becoming more and more intricate and more realistic. And, whether that's a vessel going into the Kaz port in Iraq and tending to loading from there, or the Black Sea, which wasn't as prevalent in like maybe a year ago. So definitely, I think that people know that people are watching and are trying to protect themselves
Yeah.
from that.
Yeah, of course. We are not alone out there. And I can see another interesting question about the general cargo vessels, and this can be expanded to all the vessels additionally, that's doing Black Sea voyages. To Ukraine often turn off their eyes due to the war, and if they are being classified as spoofing on our platform. So because we do own the information for the eyes, we are able to identify whenever we do have a GNN spoofing and whenever we do have an A spoofing. Just to clear out the noise from the terminology, whenever we do have a GNN spoofing, it means that we do have a general interference in the area. So we cannot blame the vessels for something like that. And this is indeed, in a lot of cases, been presented around Russia and Ukraine due to the war. So these vessels, shortly to be answered, we do not classify them as doing something dodgy, as doing spoofing. However, if these vessels, as we have seen before within Black Sea, if they are entering the Black Sea and then being presented as doing a loitering event and being loaded suddenly out of the blue and just leave out from the Black Sea, yeah, this is a spoofing case. So every point of time, everything matters based on the narrative, based on why there is a reason behind this activity. And this is what we're trying to do. And that's why we do not be based only on what the algorithms are telling to us or only to what the data are telling to us. We're trying to identify the real story.
And Dimitri, that's one of the huge things with having a human touch to this.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we stay only with the ACE data, for example, we would be highlighted as spoofing a lot of such cases. We would be saying that, oh, that general cargo that was trying to approach the Ukrainian side is doing a spoofing or is doing a dark activity. But
Absolutely.
if in the meantime we do have a general DNS jamming in that area, it means that we do have any ICE data at all, we would be producing a false positive. So we would be trying to solve a problem, and at the same time we would be creating another one, and this is not good.
Correct. Sorry, Dimitri, I stepped over you.
No worries. So I can see that we do have another one. Probably Dimitris can give us his slides over there. So how as a charterer, they will be able to identify non-sanctioned vessels while chartering vessel to VAF region.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the examples we showed and whether a vessel acts normally. And by normally, we mean doesn't conceal its location, doesn't turn off its AIS signal, anything that smells fishy and smells that something is going on might worth further investigation. If the vessel just goes to a terminal, let's say, for example, Dangote, and loads cargo, product, and then leaves, that's nothing worrisome. But then if you see the vessel going outside of Loam and turning off its AIS signal, start loitering around, going in circles, that's immediately something that as a charter or any involved player, requires further investigation and be very mindful of why it's doing that. It's always a question of why. Why is
Mhm.
it not signaling? Why is it not behaving normally?
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So we do have another one about what's companies with that they don't have large compliance teams, what's the most efficient way to integrate our risk signals into their daily workflow. So I think that the easiest thing that they can do is because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to give our perspective as Kepler and Smart Traffic and the raw data as well to the end user. So I do feel that the best thing that they can do is to analyze the risk indicator that we do presenting, and if they anything is being flagged out to their own internal systems to be raised internally. So at the end of the day, they will be having less things to monitor and more time to spend on what is worth it.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking at time. Do we have time for one more?
I think yeah, but I will try to be quick because
Okay.
here in Athens we do have the alarm ringing right now.
Okay.
So this is when something is going wrong can go even worse. So it is crazy. We do have a crazy rainstorm right now with a lot of thunders here in Athens. So probably that's the case.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then with that, we can wrap this up, and then we're going to answer all the questions. We'll respond to those and get them back to you that have answered that. And I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And as we do this, I want to take all three of us want to take a second and thank you all for attending. And if you're interested in learning more about this topic or would like a personalized walkthrough, there's going to be a brief pop-up that'll appear once the webinar is ended. So once again, thank you all. And here at Kepler, we're here for you, and we will answer your questions, get them back to you in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.